question has a vital practical edge. Under what circumstances does the state lose its legitimacy? William Edmondson brings up another point. Suppose that there are no political obligations. That means there are no legitimate governments. No government has legitimate authority, which might hugely affect the way you interact with your government, but might even more hugely affect the way governments interact with each other. So the question of whether or not we have political obligations is hugely important. Showing that we have political obligations is a matter of showing what grounds them. You can't just say, yes, we have them, and leave it at that. You've got to justify them. It used to be a popular idea with philosophers like Locke and Hobbes that political obligations arise from the consent of the people to whom they apply. So you have political obligations because you, in some sense, consented to having them. This is kind of an old idea, and recent work has started shying away from it, and that's because you can pretty obviously reply, well, I never consented to obey the law, I never signed any contract at birth saying I would be a good citizen, and frankly, if I could get away with breaking the law, then I would probably do it. This is called the no agreement problem. To which the classic response is that you gave some kind of tacit consent, or implied consent, or by living peacefully in your country you consent to obey its laws. And the reason that reply isn't so hot anymore comes from David Hume. In his essay Of the Original Contract, Hume says this: "Can we seriously say that a poor peasant or artisan has a free choice to leave his country when he knows no foreign language or manners and lives from day to day by the small wages which he acquires? We may as well assert that a man, by remaining in a vessel, freely consents to the domain of the master, though he was carried on board while asleep, and must leap into the ocean and perish the moment he leaves her." Nowadays, there are lots of different theories attempting to justify a political obligation. Some philosophers say that you acquire obligations by being part of a citizenry, even if it wasn't voluntary. Some say that if you benefit from the law, then you have a duty to obey it out of fairness. Others say that you have moral duties to other people, but the only way you can discharge them is by obeying the law. All of these different theories would probably be their own episodes, but there is one other position that I know you're going to want to hear about. Anarchists. Philosophical anarchists believe that you have no political obligations. There are no special reasons for obeying the law because it's the law. Remember though, that's still consistent with you having to obey the law for other reasons. Note also that being a philosophical anarchist, somebody who doesn't believe in political obligations, is not the same as being an anarchist in the more traditional sense, somebody who thinks that there shouldn't be any governments. As a matter of fact, some philosophical anarchists are anarchists in the more traditional sense, but not all of them. Philosophical anarchists come in two flavours. A priori anarchists say that there could be no such thing as political obligation, ever. Couldn't happen. A posteriori anarchists say, oh well, it could happen, but only in some circumstances which are extremely unlikely. Like if every law was set by a unanimous vote from everybody that it applied to, which obviously isn't going to happen. Again, anarchism could be its own episode. I just wanted to make sure that you guys saw the other side of the coin here. Anarchism used to be a popular position and then it kind of died down a bit, and it's actually made a bit of a comeback in recent years, so it is a serious philosophical position that you can defend. So the jury is still very much out on whether or not we have political obligations. This is a big, big field of study and a lot of theoretical ground. That's why I've had to give you this very brief summary. But what do you guys think? Do we have political obligations? Recommended readings, as usual, are in the description, and for more philosophical videos every Friday, please subscribe. This episode was commissioned by the Open University. To find out more about philosophy, please visit the Open Learn website. Hey, my hair and clothes have changed, and it's definitely not because I filmed the first half of the episode weeks ago, and it is because I'm actually a time-travelling wizard. The next episode was also commissioned by the Open University, so next time we'll talk about can you trust testimony, but last time we asked should smokers get lung transplants? Alex Marsden and Ilyan Bobev said, look, if we had a healthcare system which deprioritized people for treatment, if their healthcare problem came as a result of some voluntary action by them, then wouldn't we differentiate the healthcare resources? Like, wouldn't somebody with cystic fibrosis not be competing for the same resources as somebody who was pregnant? So are we really going to have all the problematic clashes that we talked about? Well, At the end of the day, it all comes down to money, doesn't it? The scenario we were talking about had as its relevant resource the availability of transplant organs, but there's no reason that we couldn't take the principles we were talking about and apply them to a healthcare budget. Now, Dan Wickler, one of the philosophers we were discussing, has interesting ideas about healthcare budgets. He said that the healthcare budget should be supplemented by the defence budget, because the job of the defence budget is to protect the people from harm. So if the biggest killer of the people is heart disease, for example, then the defence budget should go towards alleviating that, which is quite a cool idea. It has potentially quite big implications. Caroline Kielman and a few other people pointed out that pregnancy isn't a disease, so why was I talking about that? And yeah, of course, I didn't mean to insinuate that pregnancy was a disease, but it is a condition that people voluntarily put themselves in, typically, which requires some healthcare resources. So you are putting yourself in a state where you are competing for limited healthcare resources. And according to McMahon, the other philosopher we were discussing, that should deprioritise you for healthcare. So it is still a big problem. Now, Jacob Beer and Sean Watson both pointed out that if the pregnancy comes to term, there's an unborn child there who didn't voluntarily put themselves in the position of being an unborn child, so their needs shouldn't get deprioritised, which is a very good point. But certain things like painkillers and epidurals for the mother, and postnatal classes, antenatal classes, and obviously a big one, abortions, those things all would get deprioritised. So we've still got a massive problem here about people giving birth to babies getting deprioritised for healthcare. Also, speaking of babies, last time I said that women are the ones who have babies. I'm sorry about that, because that actually excludes trans men, who can, of course, still get pregnant. So what I should have said was people with wombs or people who have babies are at risk of being deprioritised there. So I'm sorry about that. Hope no one was upset by that. I'll try and do better in future. A few people disagreed with me that McMahon's theory seems to apply whatever the numbers are. So I said that if we have 1,000 people with smoking-related illnesses and one person with cystic fibrosis, according to McMahon, the cystic fibrosis person should get prioritised for care. And a few people said that didn't quite follow, because the scenario we examined, there were only 2 people, one of whom was a smoker and one of whom had cystic fibrosis. But the thing is, I don't see how scaling up the numbers really gets those 1,000 people out of it. Each person in that 1,000 will still be individually responsible and morally liable, according to McMahon, for the share of the harm that they are doing by competing for limited available healthcare resources. So I don't really see how multiplying the people gets him around that. And if we were to introduce some cutoff point and say, okay, when the numbers get big enough, we should prioritise saving the many over saving the people who haven't assumed their healthcare condition voluntarily, well, then it's difficult to introduce a cutoff point that isn't going to be arbitrary or undermine McMahon's reasons for making his argument that he did in the first place. James Smart brought up vaccination, which is a really cool debate. If a parent chooses not to vaccinate their child and the child then gets sick, should they be deprioritised for healthcare? Well, remember that McMahon's theory is that people who voluntarily assume some healthcare condition should get deprioritised. Now, the child didn't choose not to be vaccinated in that scenario. The parent chose not to have them vaccinated. So it would be out of line with what McMahon was saying to deprioritise the child. However, we might still say that the parent has taken some voluntary action which has put somebody at risk. They've obviously put the child at risk by not having them vaccinated, but they've also put the child in a place where they are competing for, again, limited healthcare resources. So maybe he would say that we should impose some kind of penalty, like a fine or charging them for the healthcare on the parents, which is a really, really cool idea. I really, really want to do an episode on vaccination, in particular whether parents actually do have the right to choose not to have their children vaccinated, and bring in some John Stuart Mill and some liberty and some government coercion theory, which is really, really cool. So thank you for bringing that up. Zulbar Luigi said that if smokers knew that they were very unlikely to get lung transplants if they got sick as a result of their smoking, then it would probably cut smoking rates and would in the long run save lives. And yeah, I mean, that's an argument you can make, and McMahon does make that argument with regards to alcoholism. The trouble is, though, I mean, I can see intuitively where the idea for that comes from, but the only way to really show that that would be true would be to actually try it and see whether it did. And if we're wrong, then a lot of people are going to die. So I think it's easier to see the intuitive idea behind that argument than it is to say, yes, I definitely think this is true and we should go for it. Dakota Hensley and Oswald Patriarch brought up a great question. What about jobs which inherently carry more risk of healthcare problems? For instance, police officers or firefighters. They choose their jobs, and if they get injured in the line of duty, do they get deprioritised for healthcare? Isn't that what McMahon would recommend? Now that's a really, really interesting issue. I suppose if McMahon wanted to get around that, if he saw it as a problem, he could say, well, there's a cut-off point for voluntarily foreseen risk. So the firefighter chooses to be a firefighter, and they foresee that as a result of that, they might get lung damage through smoke inhalation and require healthcare. But it's not a big enough or likely enough risk to deprioritize them, unlike, say, smoking, where you know that this is probably going to make you sick.